Hey there guys, and welcome to another video of EDH Basics. And in this video of the basics, we are going through making a mana base. Alright, so we are discussing how to build a mana base for all kinds of colors, 1 through to 5 color decks. It's one of those processes that you have to go through, I think, if you're going to get a deck together, and it's one of those things that it can be quite difficult and quite daunting to do, because it's like, well, how many of this and how many of that color should I have or whatnot, especially when you get more colors. And with monocolors, it's like, well, how many non-basic lands should I have and whatnot, and things like this, and what should that look like and whatnot. The one caveat again is that this is for non-CDH, essentially. I'm not going to go through CDH sort of stuff again because I don't really know that much about that sort of stuff, and it's better to ask somebody who's more aware and more knowledgeable about this sort of stuff than somebody who's not. But even if I was somewhat knowledgeable or had some idea about it, I still would say I know more about just general EDH anyway than CDH. So I'd rather talk about that because it's much easier in this sense. And most people are going to, when you're starting out, you're building your decks, you're building basic, entry level decks. You're probably not building CDH decks, or if you are starting to get into CDH, it's pretty much like a very specific list that they have, and you basically just copy and paste their lists for exactly what they have, rather than, it's up to you what you use or whatnot for the most part, what's your budget, etc. One other little thing that I want to say first off here is I am going to include colorless decks in the monocolored decks, because essentially colorless is a monocolor. Yes, I understand it's not actually a color. That's irrelevant to this part of the discussion. It doesn't really fit anywhere else, and you can only have that one specific color, even though it's not a color, whatever. I know, I get that, but whatever. It is still, you are restricted to this one type of, essentially, color. You're not able to have any other colors outside of colorless. So that makes sense. So that's why it's in this monocolored section. So let's start talking about monocolor decks first off. And for monocolor decks, again, this is my recommendation. You don't need to follow it exactly. And there is some little, things here and there. It does depend what your deck's doing as well. Like if you've got a Voltron commander or whatnot, you might want to run, more of the lands that help you get in, help you attack quicker and things like that, whatnot. But you might want to just focus on those. But again, it does depend what colors you're in. But for most monocolored decks, I would say you want to run about 5 utility lands. And the rest, I think you want to run, you're just basic plains, basic islands, basic forests, whatever, basic mountains. Because, again, for the most part, you are going to need those basics for a lot of different things like Cage Sun effects, things like that, Nykthos, though that is more of a, devotion style thing. But again, you want most of your lands to be basics. You don't want too many non-basics. Even in monocolored decks, I don't really think there's, again, I sort of said you might have some you specifically really want, but there's not really that many that, you really, really need. There's a few sometimes, depending what, what you're doing. Again, if you're playing a Voltron commander, whatever, you might want some of the lands that give your commander haste. You want some of the ones that can give your commander unblockable. Things like that. Those that specifically give you a specific utility advantage, yeah, sure. And then maybe something like guildless commons and things like this are pretty good just to toss in there. There aren't many other lands that you would really want to put in. Maybe if you're um, feeling a little bit like you want a little bit more utility, you can put some of the cycling lands in there, especially if your deck is one of the decks like red or white, that it sort of doesn't get much card draw or card advantage sometimes. Yeah, those can do well with those sorts of cards. Also, I can't remember its name, but it's from M20, I think. I think it was from a set or two before that as well. But I think, oh yes, Cryptic Caves. The Cryptic Cave style effects, like you pay this land, you sacrifice it to draw, or War Room cards like that where you pay mana to draw on the land. Some of those can be really good as well, but for the most part, again, you're going to have so many of these Cage Sun style effects, Gauntlet of Power. There's a couple other ones and whatnot, but again, like what would you need? Not too many non-basics for you. Like most of your deck is going to be, one red, pip, or two red pips, or three red pips, or even more sometimes. But so what's the point of having too many like utility lands unless it absolutely needs it? So that's what I'd say for most mono decks. But for colorless, it's a little bit different. You basically, in colorless, you want to be almost the opposite. But again, colorless really doesn't fit anywhere. I can't put it in two colors or anywhere else, so I've got to really talk about it here. Is that you want to basically have all of your lands be non-basic lands, because in this case it's like, well, I'm never going to be screwed on my color, because again, every land that's in my deck will produce the color, so I might as well have as many utility lands as possible, the ones that give me any advantage no matter what my commander basically is for the most part. Even if it's like, yes, my commander, this deck isn't a Voltron deck, I still might run, some of those lands to give my commander the ability to be going unblocked sometimes, because still I'll need to hit people with my commander or whatnot to lower their life totals and things like that, and just be going unblocked is nice. And it's an extra utility land that does something else in my deck when sometimes I need it to do that, not just produce mana. So in colorless decks, you want to find all of the extra utility lands that you can, that go into your colors, especially ones that can do things every single turn or whatever, or multiple times per game. Like, you don't want too many of the ones that you have to sacrifice unless they sort of come with a very big upside for the most part, because it's like, well, what are you sacrificing this for? Oh, whatever, it only enters the battlefield and you scry one once. That's not that useful. I mean, it's okay, but again, you could probably find better than that. Things like that, like, you want the ones that will do something when you cast your command, or it'll give it haste, or, give it unblockable, or, you can pay so much mana to draw a card, or whatever. Other different effects like that. So those can be really useful for those certain decks. So now move on to two color based decks. And again, it does depend on what your deck's doing. Like, again, if you've got Voltron, you might want some of the utility lands that help your commander get in there, things like that. So those can be okay, but besides dual lands, I would say the utility lands actually go way down. I think you maybe want one or two utility lands, maybe three. It does depend what you're doing, really. Like, if you absolutely need it, like, again, those are okay, but again, the more colors you get into, yeah, two's is a lot less than any other color, but again, except for mono, but again, you don't want to load too many colorless or, non color producing lands into too many of your decks, because again, you know, you don't want to not be able to produce the colors that you do need. Yes, you will have more opportunities for some colors, because you're not going to get something that's 3 green pips a lot of the time, or 4 black pips, or 4 white pips in a 2 color deck or whatever, because the mana costs, would outweigh what you're trying to do for the most part. So you often have a dominant color in your deck. Like, if you're in Boros and you want to run all of these artifact cards that are in red, your red might be the dominant color, so you've got to look at the color that's dominant in your deck to figure this out. But most of the time it's pretty easy to figure it out, and pretty easy. So you want to lean one way, like a little bit more heavily, like in your basics and whatnot. But for your duels, it doesn't really matter. It does depend on what your budget is. Again, like there's probably like 5 or 6 duels that are just like, oh yeah, they enter tapped and don't really do anything, or they give you a minor upside or whatever. I think the Scrylands are one of the top ones that, people often talk about being like one of the best tap lands out there and whatnot. I think some of the Kaldheim lands are really good because they have dual types and you can tutor for them and things like that. So yeah, those would be some of the better ones, but again, most of those are like under $1 or $2 for the most part. I think like the full art ones of some of the Scrylands are a couple dollars and whatnot. I think they were a lot higher because for a little while, because they were still seeing play in standard and whatnot. I think they still see play in like Pioneer or whatever. I don't know. But again, that's why maybe they're still $1 and not, or just over $1 or whatever, maybe $2 or whatever. Maybe that's why they're not at like 50 cents or whatever. But again, they were somewhat recently reprinted, so and they're just an okay land, so they're not anything too exciting. So again, they might reprint them, another few times to get their price even further down, and people and players would like that. So those are just fine. But again, if you're on a higher budget, of course, you've got 5 or so, 6 or so dual lands that are in your colors that, again, you'll probably want to run. So it does depend on your budget, but you'll often find, you run into the point of having like 5 dual lands or so in your colors that you would run, that seem pretty good, for what you're doing, whether you're on budget or whether you're not on budget. But again, you want to run as many as you can, but you want to run all the really good ones that you can afford. Like, again, there's like 5 of them, I think, or so, that are in each color pair, that, are out right now, so that you could throw those in. But again, yeah, you want to rely on, okay, what's my main color? Okay, my main color is black. I want to have most of my basics, and that be black, and then I want 5 duels and maybe 3, utility lands or whatever. It depends what colors you're in. Again, which ones you're going to talk about. Like if you're in black, you might run Bajuka Bog and things like that. So that you can be like, okay, cool, I've got, this little thing in my deck, and it, just so happens to come out. It can be really useful, especially with what I'm doing or whatnot, or it can help me get around somebody else's deck or whatever, or at least slow them down so that I can get in the game and do what I'm doing, things like that. So, again, you just got to consider what your deck's doing and then go, okay, or what color ratio you've got, kind of what's the most dominant color, and then go, okay, I want most of my lands more than half to be black, or I want more than half to be white or whatever. And then, maybe a quarter of them to be the other color or so. So so that you can, reliably hit your main color and, close to reliably hit your other color. Especially when you're in green, it really helps to be in green, I would find, and white to a slight degree sometimes as well, because white sometimes can get dual lands and things like that out. So those are the two colors that are really good at like land fetching and whatnot. Yeah, when you're in those colors, you can fix a little bit easier, and that helps you find, the other color that you need. When you're in like other colors, it is a little bit more difficult, but you've still got like terramorphic expanse and things like that, and you can again run more dual lands or as many dual lands as you can to try to mitigate the issue. I often think that terramorphic expanse evolving wilds are just essentially dual lands for the most part, because they count as the other color of land. So I would actually just like not often run them in most decks. Like if I'm thinking about it, I'm just like, okay, well, I'll just put in two more of my off color, basic land rather than run these because gives me the extra chance of actually hitting them or whatever. But anyway, that would be what I'd do there. Three colors now. Three colors is probably almost the same as two in the sense of utility lands, but the change from like two colors to three suddenly changes the math on how many dual lands you can have and how many you really want to run. Like, for the most part, I would say you want to run almost all of them, but not all of them. But it does depend. I know some people are a little bit OCD, and sometimes I'm a little bit OCD with lands and whatnot. I want to run all three of each and every thing that I've got. If I've got a shock land, I want to run all three of the shock lands. If I've got a buddy land, I want to run all three buddy lands. Things like this. So that can be a thing that people look at and go, well, why aren't I running this? Why am I not running this land if I'm running the other two or whatnot, and things like that. But again, you'll often have a dominant color, so you need to look at that. So it does change the math quite a bit. So you probably want to run, 5 of each dual land, like of each type before. Now you're like, okay, I'm going to take what's my main color and which are my two splash colors, basically. So my first duels will be, okay, all of the ones that have my main color and then my two other splash colors. So then I'm cutting the other half of my dual lands that don't really have my main color type in them, and cutting them maybe in half. So again, you want maybe 5 to 10 in total. You can definitely run as many as you want. It's the same sort of thing as I was saying with the two color pairs, is that you'll find that you still will need a fair amount of basics, and there's only so many decent dual lands that are out there. When you're on a budget, it's easier to just say, okay, well, I'll take all the tap lands because I'm on a budget, and that's what it is. What it is. But again, it's one of those things where, like, I would just go, okay, cool, that's fine. And if you're not on a budget, you're just like, well, there's still maybe 10 spots that I can fill. And yes, again, you maybe want 2 to 3 utility lands for the most part. Like, again, it's going to be very hard to find slots for more and more non-basics as you go up in colors. So it sort of kind of caps out here. I would say this is like the peak of where you could run any other like non-basics or duals or whatnot. So again, you would just want to look at your main colors and go, okay, I'm in, Abzan, and my main color is green. So I want all of my main duals to tap for green, and then I want maybe some of the ones that I can easily find, like with land searching and whatnot, to have specific types, and then that's it. Like, I won't want the other ones because even though they come in untapped and are okay, I can't find them through land searching, and therefore they're not probably worth my time to, fiddle around with and to try to fit into my deck and to try to get in there. So yeah, that's where I'd sort of say you want to be. All right, 4 colors now, and I'm whipping through these pretty well, I think. But anyway, 4 colors is the point at which I say you want one, maybe utility land, and the rest is like duels for the most part, and then a few basics and whatnot. So, as I sort of said with the last one, it's exponential when you add another color, and then we'll even talk about this in 5 colors. But again, it's exponential, the number of dual lands that you kind of get when you add another color. So again, you're probably going to have a main color, and then you're going to have your sub colors. But again, you really need those sub colors as well as your main color. But again, you want to focus on that main color for the most part. So if your main color is red or blue or whatever, or let's say you've got an mainly Izzet deck and you're just like splashing for black and white or whatever. So that's a good way to like look at it. Like, okay, my deck mainly is an Izzet deck, but I have some of these white and black cards in the deck. So I want some lands that will tap for those colors. So my main duels will be all Izzet colored duels, or Prismari, or whatever it's going to be called now. But anyway, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to look at the either main color, like if I'm mainly blue, then I'm going to be mainly looking at blue. Or if I'm mainly blue-red, then I'm going to be looking at that specific color pair. Sometimes 2 colors are the main colors, like that can happen, and it's easy to happen, and there's nothing wrong with it. But if your red is a little bit less than the blue, or your red is a little bit more than the blue, or whatever, vice versa, whatever, then you do want to have maybe a few more blue or a few more red basics and whatnot. But for the most part, you want to focus on your duels and then get to your basics. Like figure out what your main color is and then go, okay, cool, I want most of my dual lands to be producing my main color or my main 2 colors or whatever. If you find that your deck is like everything's pretty even, then that's way more difficult, but it's just one of those things that it doesn't really happen that much. Your deck is going to have a very specific theme for the most part, at a very specific direction, and a lot of the cards that you're going to play are going to be in one main color most of the time, and then splashing the other colors for support and for other options and whatnot that fill gaps in what you're already doing. So again, it's one of those things where you've got to figure out what your main color is. As I said, cutting down to 1 utility land, or maybe 2 at the most, I would say, you really need to, okay, what does my deck absolutely want to do and need to do? My deck is an absolute Voltron deck, and I need ways to get my commander through without being blocked. That is one card that I need. And then maybe I'm in black, so maybe I want Bajuka Bulk, and that will probably be it. Like, but most 4-color commanders, like, it's not going to be that relevant for you to be like a Voltron deck that many times. But again, it can be relevant. But again, there are some like strategies that do need certain lands and whatnot. I need my commander to probably tap or do its thing straight away or as quickly as possible, because my commander is a magnet for removal. So I'm not going to sit here and go, oh, well, I'm just going to hope that it doesn't die, or that hope my opponents don't have removal for it. I've got to do my thing right away, right now, so I need haste, or I need it to be protected, or have shroud or whatnot, things like this, or hexproof, whatever. So those little things, some of those you can get away with. But again, you need to be able to produce all of your colors at the same time. So it's one of those things where you're just like, well, I can't fit in too many of these other utility land slots, because the rest of my deck is all of these, off-color pips here and there. And yes, I can use those colors to pay for generic mana costs again, but I will need white mana later, or I'll need green mana later for this, or I'll need this mana later for this, so you're never going to be sitting there going, well, it's useless for me to have white. Yes, sure, I don't need it right now, but eventually I will need that color, whatever it is. Okay, 5-color. And this is where I say you can only probably run one utility land, absolutely one, and that's probably like Bajuka Bog or whatever, things like that. Like graveyard hate cards that are just like, yes, this is really good. Like, there's again not many Voltron commanders. There's not that many cards that scale well, that are good cards overall, that you can put into 5 colors that you can go, yeah, that's a decent utility land. There are maybe some, but there's just not enough, and there's just too much problem with trying to fix. Like, I will say also that tri-lands, like, I probably should have mentioned it earlier, but tri-lands are one of those things that I don't personally like run or do much with, but they are better fixing for 3+ color decks for the most part, because it contains, if you're in a 3-color deck, it contains all of your colors. If you're in a 4-color deck, it contains 3 out of your 4, and if you're in a 5-color deck, well, it contains 3 out of your 5. So in those decks, you might want tri-lands as well. It's kind of like, I don't consider tri-lands to be a dual land, and like Command Tower is just a card that is essentially a dual land. I count that as a dual land. I don't really count Exotic Orchard as a dual land, though, because unless you're doing something specific with like the needing opponent's colors, I don't think you want it, unless you absolutely need it, or if you're in 4+ color decks. So that's where I would say that cards like that, maybe 3+ colors, can use it as well, but again, it's not that worth it a lot of the time to run those cards. It's just fine. It's an untapped duel, or tri-land sometimes. So it can be alright, but again, the main reason why I don't really run triumphs is because all the triumphs that exist, even the fetchable ones, come into play tap. Yeah, I know they have that the fetchable ones have that utility of being able to be cycled. To me, I wish they just didn't have that cycling ability and came in untapped for some unbeknownst, like, determined reason or whatever. I don't think you could make them as strong as like the shocks, because then that's a little bit too good or whatever, because it's just like everyone will pay 3 or whatever to have them come in untapped all the time. So maybe that's too much of a no or whatever, especially for a land type that has or a land that has the types or whatever. So yeah, I don't think that they might do that. But again, triumphs can be very powerful and very good, and they belong in people's decks if you really want that fixing, and you want to find your fixing. That's another reason why I tend to not run them in a little way is because, well, it's like, yes, I can find them with my dual searching cards, but it makes it a little bit too easy sometimes to have all of my colors and whatnot. And it's also why I stick away from building so many colors. But anyway, when you get up to this number of colors, your number of basics will also drastically drop. And again, you'll have so many options open up to you in terms of dual lands and whatnot. And again, you just want to focus mainly on your main color or main 2 colors, whatever, again, and then just plot every other color that you will need and at what points you will roughly need it, especially when you're getting into these colors. If you have Counterspell, which is 2 blue mana, you might want to opt out of cards like that are 2 hard blue pips. It's well, my deck can't really swing enough colors into blue, especially since I'm only running blue mainly for Counterspell and maybe 1 or 2 other cards or whatever. So my blue count is very low, so I might want to opt out from Counterspell to something that has 1 blue pip, or whatever. Or it depends what your budget is. Again, you might have Force of Will and you might not care or whatever. But again, will you have enough blue cards or whatever to pitch to it? I don't know, and all that sort of stuff. But again, you want to know what you're doing. Is your main color blue or is your main color green? What's your main color? Figure that out, or figure out, again, I'm mainly an Izzet deck and I'm splashing green, white, and black. So these are all, all these other cards, I have, a white, an Orzhov card, but I don't have a double black pipped card. You don't want those cards because, again, if you're mainly a Simic deck or whatever, then you don't want any of these cards that are now, okay, I need 2 black pips for this because, again, I'm only splashing black. And if I need 2 or, well, more than 1 black pip on any of my spells, then that's a spell that, isn't probably good for my deck or is trying to push me too far out of my main color or my main 2 colors or whatever. Some decks can be 3 main colors sometimes. I haven't really seen too many decks like that, and there are some decks that are just Woburg nonsense, like Niv Mizzet, or whatever. There are some decks that are just oh yes, my commander is Golos. I know Golos is banned, whatever, but or Kenrith or whatever. Mainly my commander is white or whatever. Mainly my commander is red or whatnot. So I really need to worry about the red. I don't really need to worry about these other colors. Eventually I'll get them, whatever, that's fine. But again, you need to figure out, okay, these are the top, maybe 20 duals and tri-lands or multicolor lands that I can fit into my deck. And then that's where I go from there. And I want most of them to be tapping for blue, red, whatever is my main one, main color or my main 2 colors or whatever. And then the other lands just are, helping me cast the other 3 colors, 2 or 3, 4 colors in my deck. So that's the way I would look at trying to build a mana base in that regard, and then again fill the rest out with basics and focus in on, I want most of my basics to be my main color, or my main colors again, and then splash, the rest of the colors, less and less and less. But that's it pretty much for this video here, guys. What do you think about this video? I hope it's helpful and informative to you guys to, if you're trying to build these multicolor decks and whatnot. It's very easy for the most part to build monocolor decks and two-color decks, I think, which is why a lot of newer players sort of build those decks, is because it's like, well, I don't really have to worry too much, and I can sort of, again, get away with having a lot more tap lands and whatnot for my fixing, because it doesn't really matter. Whereas when you get into more colors, you're a little bit more like, well, I need most of my colors, and I need most of my colors as quickly as I can, so I can't afford as many tap lands and whatnot. But anyway, that might be some discussion or whatnot for other videos or whatnot here and there down the road. But let me know what you guys think, and hope you've enjoyed. And join me again in another one. Hey, you've just finished watching one of our videos. A bunch of other videos are popping up on your screen now for you to check out, so why not check them out?